Bees, democracy, voting, and the language of dance. Right now, as you're watching this video, somewhere in the world, about 80,000 creatures are making a collective decision without consulting a single leader. Nobody's raising hands. Nobody's taking minutes. Nobody's calling for a quorum. But a decision will be made, precisely, quickly, and almost always correctly. They'll choose a new home from dozens of candidates. Evaluate each option, deliberate, weigh the pros and cons, discard the bad ones, pick the best, and move there all at once in a single cloud. Their brains aren't even the size of a pea. Each one has roughly 1 million neurons. We have 100 billion, and yet they manage to do something most human communities do poorly: make good decisions together. These are honeybees, those buzzing little insects you walk past every summer without a second thought. And what goes on inside their hive is studied at top universities around the world as a model of democracy. I'm not kidding. Actual professors at actual universities look at bees to figure out how humans might learn to make better decisions. I remember the first time I read about bee democracy. I sat there for a few minutes trying to process it. Insects, teaching us how to vote. It was one of those moments when your picture of the world shifts just slightly, and you realize you've been looking in the wrong direction the whole time. Today, we're going inside their hive, into a world that's 100 million years old, where every decision is collective, where language is danced rather than spoken, and where one of the greatest discoveries was made by a man who won a Nobel Prize for it. Welcome to the secret parliament. Let's start with a question that would probably stump you if you thought about it long enough. What is a hive? A bunch of insects living together? Or one creature assembled from thousands of bodies? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. A group, of course. We can see individual bees. One flies out for nectar. Another comes back. A third crawls across the comb. Each one on its own. But here's the thing. Take a single bee out of the hive. Feed her. Give her water, sugar, warmth. She won't last long. Within a few days, she'll weaken, grow sluggish, lose her sense of direction. And within a week, she'll be gone, even under perfect conditions, even if nothing looks physically wrong. Why? Because an individual bee isn't really a self-sustaining organism in the full sense of the word. She's a cell inside a larger creature. Biologists have had a term for this for a long time: superorganism. It's when a group of individuals is so tightly connected that it behaves like a single living thing. It breathes, it responds to threats, it regulates its temperature, it remembers, it ages and dies as a whole. A hive is one of the most striking examples of a superorganism in nature. Think of it this way. The temperature inside a bee colony stays within a narrow range, around 95 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round. Outside, it might be 20 below or over 100. Inside, it's always 95. No single bee does this. No single bee can. She doesn't have thermoregulation the way we do. But thousands of bees together, each reacting only to what she feels right now, create a flawless thermostat. Too cold, they huddle into a tight ball and shiver their flight muscles to generate heat. Too hot, they spread out across the combs, bring in water, and fan their wings to push air through. Nobody gives the order. There's no headquarters, no head of the climate department. Each bee responds to a local signal, and from millions of these local reactions, a global behavior emerges that works better than an industrial air conditioner. That's a superorganism in action. Not just a group, a living being assembled from many smaller bodies. A beehive is born, lives, ages, reproduces, and dies as a single entity. Birth is the moment when an old colony throws off a swarm and it flies out to found a new one. Reproduction at the superorganism level isn't the birth of an individual bee. It's the birth of a new hive. This is a fundamentally different architecture of life than the one we're used to. Our mind lives in one place, inside a skull. The mind of a hive is distributed across tens of thousands of bodies. Remove any 1,000 bees, and the hive keeps running. Remove 1,000 neurons from our brain in the right spot, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Honestly, it took me a long time to get comfortable with this idea, that an insect I'd always thought of as a unit isn't actually the unit. The unit is the entire hive, and each bee is a cell. Once you see it that way, everything changes. Bees have been on Earth for a very long time. By the latest estimates, roughly 100 million years. Dinosaurs were still around. Flowering plants were just beginning their march across the planet, and it was their arrival that made bees possible. Because bees are wasps. If you look at the evolutionary tree, the honeybee sits squarely inside the group of stinging wasps. About 100 million years ago, one lineage of wasps made an unusual move. Instead of hunting other insects, they started collecting pollen, a plant-based protein, and feeding it to their larvae. That one small dietary shift kicked off an evolutionary cascade that reshaped the entire planet, because bees and flowers began evolving together. Plants that offered more nectar attracted more pollinators. Bees that were better at finding and working flowers left more offspring. Millions of years of mutual pressure, and the result was flowers that can't reproduce without bees, and bees that can't survive without flowers. Coevolution in its purest form. It's not an exaggeration to say that the world full of flowering plants we know today is largely thanks to bees. Before them, plants relied on wind and random insects. Wind is an unreliable partner. It doesn't care where pollen lands. A bee carries it with purpose, to the right flower of the right species. Pollination efficiency jumped by orders of magnitude, and plants exploded in diversity. Today, there are about 20,000 known species of bees on Earth. 20,000. For comparison, there are roughly 6,000 species of mammals. Bees are nearly 3 times more diverse. They live everywhere except Antarctica. In deserts, in the tropics, in mountains, in cities. Most of them are solitary bees that live on their own, without a colony. Only a small fraction, a few hundred species, went down the path that led to the superorganism. The western honeybee, the one kept in hives, is one of them, and it has taken the principle of collective living to a level that astonishes even biologists. Now let's look at the individual bee, because written into that small body is her entire biography as a worker of the superorganism. Her body has 3 parts: head, thorax, abdomen. On the head sit 2 large compound eyes, each made up of roughly 7,000 tiny lenses. A bee doesn't see the world the way we do. Her vision is blurry, but she catches the slightest movement and perceives ultraviolet light. Flowers that look plain white or yellow to us glow with intricate patterns to a bee. Patterns that literally say, "Nectar here." It's advertising we can't see. Besides those 2 large eyes, a bee has 3 small, simple eyes on top of her head. They don't pick up shapes, but they're extremely sensitive to light levels. Bees use them to navigate by the sun, and even on a cloudy day, they can determine its position through the polarization of light. Their navigation is among the most precise in the insect world. The antennae are the primary sense organ. Through them, a bee detects smell, taste, temperature, humidity, and even touch. If you think they're just 2 little feelers, think again. Each antenna carries about 60,000 receptor cells. A bee perceives the world through her antennae as richly as we do through our eyes. On the proboscis sit taste receptors. The proboscis is long and tube-shaped, and it lets her reach nectar deep inside the most tucked-away flowers. In some species, it's so long that the bee can physically feed only on specific plants. That kind of specialization makes her an irreplaceable pollinator for those particular species. On the hind legs are special baskets. The scientific name is corbicula. That's not a metaphor. These are actual concave surfaces surrounded by stiff hairs, where a bee packs pollen. When you spot a bee in your garden with yellow or orange lumps on her back legs, those are loaded corbicula. A single bee can carry up to 1/3 of her own body weight in them. On the abdomen sit wax glands. only in worker bees and only during a specific window, roughly day 10 through day 16 of life. These glands secrete thin, translucent flakes of wax, the raw material bees use to build comb. The wax comes out of the bee's own body. She literally produces the building material for her home. At the tip of the abdomen is the stinger, a curved barb with serrations and a venom sac. And here's one of the most tragic features of bee biology. When a worker bee stings a mammal, us, a bear, a cow, the barbs catch in the elastic skin. She can't pull the stinger out. She tears away, leaving the stinger and part of her abdomen behind in the victim. And within minutes, she dies. It's an act of self-sacrifice hardwired into her biology. The individual bee dies so the hive can live. And the hive remembers, because the stinger keeps working even after it's ripped away. The muscles of the venom sac keep contracting, pumping venom in, and alongside the venom, the stinger releases an alarm pheromone, a scent that tells every other bee, "Danger, enemy here, come now," and more defenders converge on the target. It's a biological alarm system that one bee leaves behind after her own death, performing one last act of service for the family. A bee has two stomachs. One is a regular digestive stomach. The other is the honey crop. It's a storage compartment where nectar collects during flight. The crop is separated from the digestive stomach by a special valve. Nectar held in the crop isn't digested. It stays separate so the bee can bring it back to the hive and pass it along to others. The life of a worker bee in summer lasts about 6 weeks. A short life. But every day of it follows a remarkably precise script. The first 3 days after emerging, cleaning duty. The young bee, barely dried off from hatching out of her cell, starts scrubbing the cells where new eggs will be laid. Nobody teaches her, nobody shows her. She just starts doing it. Days 4 through 6, feeding older larvae. She brings them pollen and honey. Days 6 through 12, caring for the youngest larvae and pupae. During this phase, her glands that produce royal jelly are especially active, and she feeds it to those who need it. Days 12 through 18, construction. Now her wax glands are firing, and she becomes the hive's mason. She secretes wax, shapes it into cells, and repairs damage to the comb. Days 18 through 21, guarding the entrance. She stands on the landing board and checks everyone coming in. Scent matches. Your family, come on in. Wrong scent, back out. And only from day 21 until the end of her life, foraging, flying out for food, the most dangerous job and the hardest. That's exactly why it's given to those who don't have long to live anyway. Notice what's happening here. A bee doesn't choose a career. Her career changes with age. She cycles through every role: nurse, then builder, then guard, and only at the end, forager. Her body changes to match each role. At the right moment, the right glands activate. At the right moment, they shut down. But here's what's even more astonishing. If the hive urgently needs foragers because a batch of older bees was lost, younger bees can accelerate their development and start foraging ahead of schedule. Or the reverse. If the hive needs nurses and there aren't enough, older bees can revert to a younger state, reactivate their brood food glands, and start caring for larvae again. This is called biological plasticity. Bees can adjust their own physiology to meet the colony's current needs. Not consciously, through chemical signals that permeate the entire hive and tell each individual bee who she needs to be right now. One insect, the same genome, but depending on the system's signals, a different body, different behavior, a different fate. At the very center of the hive lives the queen. Just one. She's the mother of every bee in the colony, genetically every single one. Each of the 40, 50, 80,000 bees in the hive is her daughter. The queen looks different from the workers. She's longer. Her abdomen is larger. Her movements are slower, almost regal. Workers always clear a path around her, constantly grooming and feeding her. From the outside, it really does look like a royal court. But the queen doesn't rule. Let's clear up that misconception right away. She doesn't issue orders, doesn't direct construction, doesn't assign tasks. Her role is far more modest and far more extraordinary at the same time. She lays eggs, up to 2,000 a day, more than her own body weight every single day, for her entire life. And she doesn't live 6 weeks like the workers. She lives several years, sometimes 5, sometimes 7. Within the same colony, one queen can be the mother of multiple generations. She is the biological wellspring of the entire family. And here's the most incredible part. The queen and a worker bee are genetically the same DNA. There's no special set of queen genes, none. She becomes a queen not because of genetics, but because of food. When the hive needs a new queen, the old one is weakening, or the colony is preparing to split. The bees select an ordinary larva in an ordinary cell, and they start feeding her a special substance, royal jelly. It's a secretion from specialized glands in worker bees, extremely rich in proteins and particular bioactive compounds. Regular larvae get royal jelly for only the first 3 days. Then they're switched to pollen and honey. But the future queen gets nothing but royal jelly, always. All the way through pupation. And something magical happens. A larva that was destined to become an ordinary worker bee, about ½ an inch long, transforms into a queen nearly 3/4 of an inch long. She develops fully functional ovaries. Her body shape changes. She gains the ability to lay thousands of fertilized eggs a day. She lives 100 times longer than a regular worker. Same DNA, different diet. A completely different life. Scientists still don't fully understand how it works. What we do know is that royal jelly contains a specific protein that affects which genes get switched on and off. Essentially, the bees are epigenetically programming their future ruler. Biochemistry instead of a selection committee. I remember the first time I read about this, I thought, what a strange and beautiful design for life. That you can change a creature's destiny not with a weapon, not with isolation, not with upbringing, but with food. And it will literally grow into something else. Drones are the third caste, males. They're larger than workers, with huge eyes that meet at the top of the head, and no stinger at all. They don't build, don't forage, don't defend. They eat honey the workers collected, and they wait. For what? The mating flight, the sole purpose of their existence. In spring and summer, young queens born in neighboring hives fly out on their mating flights. They climb high into the air, sometimes 100 feet up, sometimes 130. Drones from all over the area swarm toward them. The queen mates with several, usually 10 to 20, one after another, right there in midair. For a drone, mating is fatal. After transferring his sperm, his reproductive organs tear away and remain inside the queen. He drops to the ground and dies. Every male who successfully mates during a mating flight will never come home, and the ones who didn't succeed, a different fate awaits them. In the fall, as the cold approaches and resources need to be conserved, the worker bees drag every drone out of the hive. They won't let them back in. Drones, unable to feed themselves, freeze or starve to death just outside the entrance. Harsh? Yes, but it's not cruelty. It's the economics of a superorganism. The drone is no longer needed. The drone is no longer here. Nothing personal. Now let's talk about the discovery that earned one man a Nobel Prize. And I mean that literally. His name was Karl von Frisch, an Austrian zoologist. In the 1920s, he began observing bees returning to the hive with food. He noticed that each returning forager did something peculiar. She'd run in a quick circle, then shift into a waggling motion along a straight line, then circle again, then waggle again. Other bees in the hive followed her closely with their antennae, tracing her movements. And shortly after, they'd fly out of the hive, straight to the same nectar source the first bee had found. How did they know where to go? Frisch proposed something that sounded impossible. The dance was a language. The waggling conveyed information to other bees about where to find food. And he set out to prove it, experiment after experiment. He set up feeders filled with sugar water at different distances from the hive, in different directions. He marked individual bees with tiny dabs of paint so he could tell them apart. He recorded every dance, the angle, the duration, the speed of the waggle. And he cracked it. What he found was extraordinary. The duration of the waggle run encodes distance. The longer the bee waggles, the farther away the food. 1 second of waggling corresponds to roughly 6/10 of a mile. 2 seconds, about 1.25 miles. A short waggle, close by. The angle of the waggle run on the comb encodes direction relative to the sun. If the bee waggles straight up, the food is directly toward the sun. Straight down, directly away from it. At a 45-degree angle to the right, fly 45 degrees to the right of the sun. An insect the size of a fingertip joint is transmitting two-dimensional coordinates in open space to other insects, through dance, on dark, vertical combs inside the hive, where the other bees can't even see her. They sense it through vibrations and touch. Wait, let's pause for a second and let that sink in. They don't use words. They have no vocabulary. They have no abstract concepts. But they evolved a system in which one insect can tell the others, fly a 1/4 mile that way, there's food. And the others understand, and they go, and they find it. This is language, not in some watered-down metaphorical sense. A genuine symbolic language, where movements stand for distances and directions, and between the symbol and its meaning there is a strict, learned connection. Karl von Frisch won the Nobel Prize in 1973, the big one, in physiology or medicine, for decoding the language of bees. A Nobel Prize for figuring out what insects were saying. And that's just the beginning. Because besides the waggle dance, there are other dances. The round dance, for nearby sources, within about 300 feet. The waggle, for distant ones. There's the tremble dance, which means, I need help. I've brought back so much nectar I can't unload it fast enough. And there's the stop signal, a brief vibration that can interrupt another bee's dance if she's advertising a location that turned out to be dangerous. Yes, you heard that right. Bees can argue. One bee recommends a spot. Another, who went there and ran into a predator, delivers a stop signal and essentially asks the first one to quit the sales pitch. Collective fact-checking. I remember reading about this for the first time and thinking, they argue. A genuine debate. With evidence. In a language it took us 100 years to decode, and they've been using it for 100 million years. Have you ever watched a bee dance on the comb? If you know a beekeeper, ask them to show you. It's one of the strangest and most moving sights in all of nature. A tiny creature performing completely purposeful movements, surrounded by attentive listeners who understand every step. Drop a comment if you've ever seen a bee dance in person. I'd love to know what it felt like. And now the main event. The reason we're really here today. In spring, when a colony outgrows its hive, it splits. The old queen and roughly half the workers pour out into the open air and cluster nearby. A massive, humming ball of tens of thousands of bodies. That's a swarm. You may have seen one hanging from a tree branch or a fence post in early summer. A dark, writhing mass that makes you want to back away slowly. But a swarm is not dangerous. At that moment, the bees are occupied with the most important question of their lives. They're looking for a new home, and this is where the work of Thomas Seeley, a biologist at Cornell University, comes in. He studied this process for several decades. His research became the basis for a book called Honeybee Democracy, and what he described changed the scientific community's understanding of what collective decision-making really means. From the swarm, several hundred scouts fly out. These are the most experienced foragers, older bees. Their mission is to survey the surrounding area within a radius of a few miles and find potential sites for a new hive. A hollow in an old tree, a crevice in a rock, an abandoned cavity, anything suitable. But suitable is not a simple concept. A good site has to meet a long list of criteria. Internal volume, not too small, not too large. Around 10 gallons is ideal. A small entrance, easier to defend, preferably facing south. High enough off the ground that predators have a hard time reaching it. Not too damp, not too drafty. Each scout returns to the swarm and begins to dance. The same waggle dance. Only now it describes not a food source, but a potential home. Duration of the waggle, distance, angle, direction, and the intensity of the dance. How good the scout thinks the site is. And here's what's remarkable. Scouts dance at the same time, each one about her own site. The swarm may have 10, 15, 20 different options under discussion simultaneously. One group of scouts promotes one option. Another group pushes a second. A third group champions a third. It's open, direct campaigning. Each one is saying, "Go there, I've been there, it's the best." Other bees listen. They watch the dances. And if a particular dance looks convincing, they fly out, follow the directions to the advertised site, and evaluate it with their own senses. If they like it, they come back and start dancing in support of that candidate. If they don't, they simply don't dance. That's it. No attack ads. Think about that for a second. Nobody wastes energy trying to talk others out of bad options. Everyone spends their energy only on endorsing good ones. And the winner is the one who builds the most support. Gradually, the weaker options fade. Their supporters stop dancing. They switch to other candidates. And the best option, the one that objectively meets the criteria most closely, starts gaining more and more dancers. And then comes the moment Seeley called quorum. When enough scout bees, roughly 15 to 20, have gathered at one particular site, they fly back to the swarm and begin producing a specific signal. It means, "We've reached quorum. Time to fly."